Look at the technology around you right now. I mean, seriously, pick up whatever digital device is closest to you.
Carefully, though.
Right, carefully. But just imagine, opening your hand and letting that device drop straight onto a hard concrete floor. What happens?
Well, aside from the pure panic.
Exactly, aside from the panning. Does it make this loud, terrifying, incredibly expensive sounding crashing noise?
Most likely. Right.
Right. And if it shatters or if it bends or physically breaks in any way, well, congratulations, you have just identified computer hardware.
It is a highly effective, if slightly destructive, stress test for your IT budget.
It really gets the point across instantly, though, because we spend so much time talking about software and the cloud and virtual environments that we just kind of forget the physical reality underneath it all.
We take it for granted. Software is virtual. It's the code, the apps, the operating system.
Yeah, but hardware is the physical foundation of absolutely everything we do in modern business. It's the stuff you can touch, the stuff you can accidentally break.
And most importantly, from a management perspective, it's the stuff you have to actually allocate capital to purchase, power, and maintain.
Exactly. So welcome to our deep dive into managing the future. This is specifically designed for the Dr. Sam Pack College of Business students at Tarleton State University, as well as all you working professionals out there who are, actively looking to sharpen your operational edge.
It's great to be here.
Today, we are taking a massive look under the hood with Module 19, Computer Hardware. And this entire discussion is built on the foundational material from Connect Master Management Information Systems by Richard Tedman and Casey Wilhelm. This is the McGraw-Hill 2026 edition.
It really is a critical module. I mean, you simply cannot manage information systems effectively or make sound financial decisions for a corporation if you don't understand the physical machinery.
You have to know what you are buying.
Right, exactly. You have to know what's actually processing all that information.
Which, honestly, perfectly sets up why we need to take a quick step back before we start tearing apart motherboards and microchips.
Oh, the recap?
Yeah. In our last deep dive, Module 18, we covered a concept that, on the surface, might seem totally unrelated to computer parts. We spent a lot of time on the time value of money, or TVM.
And that is actually the ideal bridge into hardware procurement.
Right. Because in Module 18, we firmly established the fundamental financial principle that $1 in your hand today is fundamentally worth more than $1 you might receive in the future.
Yeah, and the mechanics behind that really come down to opportunity costs and investment potential.
Exactly.
Like if you have $1 today, you can invest it, it earns interest and it compounds. A future dollar just has none of that growth potential.
Right, and we didn't just stay theoretical with that. We looked at the actual mathematical tools businesses use to measure this stuff. We dug into net present value, or NPV.
Which helps us see what a future stream of cash is worth in today's dollars.
Yeah. And we looked at the internal rate of return, the IRR, to figure out the break-even interest rate of an investment. We even broke down the structural differences in annuities, which was super interesting.
Oh, right. Distinguishing between an ordinary annuity and an annuity due.
Yes, that distinction is vital for accurate financial modeling. With an ordinary annuity, those regular payments happen at the very end of a period, like a standard corporate loan payment.
But with an annuity due, the payments occur at the beginning of the period. Think of like an office lease or a commercial insurance premium.
And the mathematical reality of that annuity due is that because you're putting that cash to work one period sooner, it essentially compounds an entire extra period of interest.
It drastically changes the valuation.
It really does. And then we tied it all together with the weighted average cost of capital, the WACC, which is the blended cost a company pays to finance its operations, right?
Right, a mix of its debt and equity.
Yeah.
And we established that corporations use the WACC as their ultimate hurdle rate.
Yeah, if an internal project's IRR doesn't clear that WACC hurdle, the project is just destroying shareholder value. So, bringing this all back to today, why on earth does a business professional or an MIS student at Tarleton State need to hold those complex TVM calculations in their head while we talk about computer processors and RAM?
Because, simply put, hardware is never just an IT decision. It is a massive capital expenditure.
Oh, definitely.
Imagine an IT director walking into the CFO's office and asking for $1 million to upgrade the company's regional servers. The CFO isn't going to just say yes because the new servers are faster.
No way. They want to see the numbers.
Exactly. They're going to run those exact calculations, the NPV, the IRR, and compare it against the company's WACC.
Right, to decide if investing that $1 million in physical hardware today actually generates enough operational efficiency and future revenue to justify the cost.
Or if it makes more financial sense to just delay the upgrade for 3 years and invest that capital elsewhere.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah.
So today we are looking at the actual physical machinery you were evaluating for that investment. You are evaluating the engine of the business.
It's all connected.
It really is. Now, before we start breaking down that engine, just a quick reminder for you listening, make sure to like, subscribe, follow, and share this deep dive with your classmates, your study groups, or your colleagues.
And leave a comment.
Yes, leave a comment below. We genuinely love having you as part of the conversation. Plus, dropping a comment actually sets you up perfectly for a discussion question we have for you at the end of the show.
We do have a lot of ground to cover today, so we should probably start by defining exactly what it is we are looking at.
Let's do it. When we talk about a computer, the word gets thrown around so much it almost loses its meaning.
It really does.
Like, my smart thermostat is a computer, my phone is a computer, the giant tower under my desk is a computer. According to the Tedman and Wilhelm text, what fundamentally unifies all of these devices?
Well, they define a computer as a digital device that executes 4 very specific basic functions.
Okay, what are they?
It accepts input, it processes that data into information, it provides output, and it stores data.
Input, process, output, storage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They refer to this framework as the information processing cycle, or the IPOS cycle.
IPOS.
Right. And that cycle is basically the heartbeat of all digital technology.
Whether it's a disposable digital watch or a multi-million-dollar banking system, it relies on that exact 4-step cycle.
Yeah. And to execute IPOS, the system requires a marriage of 2 distinct categories, hardware and software.
Which we've kind of touched on. Hardware is the tangible stuff, the circuitry, memory chips, ports.
And software provides the intangible instructions, primarily the operating system, that tells that physical hardware how to behave.
You know, I used to hear analogies comparing this IPOS cycle to a kitchen.
Oh, yeah. Like raw ingredients as input.
Exactly. Cooking as processing, the plated meal as output, and the fridge as storage.
That's a classic analogy.
It works, but I think for a business context, it's way more accurate to view the IPOS cycle as an industrial manufacturing plant.
Oh, I like that. Walk me through it.
So the input is the raw, unstructured data flowing into the receiving bay. Maybe it's a customer swiping a credit card or a sensor reading a temperature.
Okay, and the process.
That's the actual factory floor, where the hardware, a heavy machinery, takes that raw data, runs it through specific algorithms, and transforms it into something valuable.
Right, turning data into actual information.
Yeah. Then the output is the finished, packaged good rolling off the assembly line, ready to be utilized by a manager via a dashboard or report.
And storage is the massive warehouse where you keep the finished goods and the historical records for future use.
Exactly.
That is a much stronger way to visualize it, especially because it highlights the transformation of raw data into usable business intelligence.
And continuing with that manufacturing plant analogy, that factory floor has to be housed in a physical building.
Right. And in the computing world, that physical structure is called the system unit.
Also commonly known as the chassis or the case, right?
Yes, exactly. The system unit is the physical enclosure that protects and houses the primary internal components.
Like the motherboard.
Right, which is the main central nervous system circuit board. And, of course, the central processing unit, the CPU, which acts as the brain of the operation.
And what is critical to understand from a hardware design perspective is how the physical location and size of that system unit entirely dictate the form factor of the computer.
That is a huge point.
Let's break down those form factors because this is where the theoretical meets the actual corporate budget.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road.
When you are procuring hardware, choosing the right form factor is a massive strategic decision. The most ubiquitous form factor in business today is the laptop.
Absolutely. Laptops, and to a slightly different extent, tablets, represent the mobile workstation.
Laptops feature that hinged clamshell design integrating the screen and the keyboard, and crucially, they run a full, robust operating system.
Right. The system unit is compressed into the base directly beneath the keyboard.
They really offer a highly effective balance. You get serious processing power combined with the mobility required for modern hybrid work, and they usually retain some level of hardware upgradability.
Tablets, on the other hand, push the needle entirely toward extreme mobility, often at the expense of raw power and flexibility.
Because the system unit in a tablet is just sandwiched directly behind the touchscreen, right?
Exactly. The touchscreen serves as the primary input mechanism. And while you can certainly attach peripheral keyboards, tablets traditionally run on mobile operating systems.
And that's a huge distinction for a business.
A massive one. Running a mobile OS means an employee might be restricted to just the mobile app versions of your enterprise software.
Which usually lack the full functionality of the desktop versions.
Exactly. Furthermore, from an IT lifecycle perspective, tablets are generally closed systems.
Meaning you can't really upgrade them.
Right. You cannot open them up and upgrade the RAM or swap in a new processor. Whatever hardware specifications you purchase on day one are the exact specifications you are locked into until the device is retired.
Which brings us to the stationary heavyweights. Desktops and all-in-ones.
Oh, the classics.
Desktops represent the traditional, uncompromised computing experience. They utilize a separate, standalone system unit tower that sits on or under a desk.
They have a massive physical footprint, but that size is actually their greatest strength.
Because they aren't constrained by the need to be paper-thin or run on a battery.
Exactly. They're the undisputed kings of upgradability and thermal management.
So if you are running an architecture firm rendering 3D models or a finance team running Monte Carlo simulations, you want desktops.
Absolutely. You can easily open the tower, install a high-end graphics card, double the memory, and the large physical fans ensure the system doesn't overheat and throttle its performance.
They are built for endurance and power. Now, all-in-ones represent compromise aimed at aesthetics and spatial efficiency.
Right. They integrate the entire system unit directly into the back casing of a large monitor.
They provide an incredibly clean, minimalist look for a front-facing office environment, like a high-end reception desk. You don't have a tangle of cables or a bulky tower kicking around.
However, much like tablets, that sleek integration makes them notoriously difficult and often completely impossible to upgrade.
But the hardware market doesn't just sit still. The sources point out how manufacturers are constantly trying to bridge these gaps. That is where two-in-one computers come into play.
Right. These hybrids are essentially attempting to deliver the ultimate holy grail of computing.
The mobility and intuitive touchscreen of a tablet, married to the raw processing power and full operating system of a traditional laptop.
They achieve this usually by utilizing solid-state drives to keep the device incredibly fast and light, and featuring hinges that allow the keyboard to either detach completely or fold a full 360 degrees behind the display.
It's pretty amazing engineering, and we can't discuss form factors without addressing smartphones.
No, we definitely can't.
From a purely technical standpoint, a smartphone is a highly advanced, handheld computer equipped with cellular networking capabilities.
They rely entirely on durable, solid-state technology with no moving parts to maximize battery life and survive being constantly moved around in pockets and bags.
But they are inherently constrained by their minimal screen real estate and lower computational thresholds compared to a laptop.
Right. We also see highly specialized form factors like media players.
Like an Amazon Kindle for ebooks or an Apple TV for streaming video.
Exactly. Devices which are purpose-built for the consumption of specific media rather than the creation of it.
But the category that I think is most fascinating, and the one that usually catches people off guard, is embedded computers.
Oh, yes. These are fully functional digital devices that are seamlessly integrated into larger mechanical or electrical systems.
You don't interact with them using a mouse or a keyboard, but they are constantly running that exact same IPOS cycle, accepting input, processing it, and providing output.
We're talking about the microchips managing the fuel injection in your car.
Or the logic board inside a smart thermostat regulating HVAC systems.
Or the sophisticated sensors inside an MRI machine.
And embedded systems require us to look at a very specific type of software management, right?
Yes. Because of what they do, embedded computers almost exclusively utilize a real-time operating system, or RTOS.
RTOS. What is the defining characteristic of that?
It's absolute intolerance for delay. It is engineered to process incoming data streams instantaneously without any buffering whatsoever.
Because buffering in that context could literally be fatal.
Exactly. Think about it. When you are driving on the highway and you slam on your brakes to avoid a collision, the embedded computer managing your anti-lock braking system cannot afford to display a spinning loading icon while it allocates memory.
Yeah, that would be a disaster.
It must accept the physical input of the pedal, process the velocity and wheel slip data, and output the command to pulse the brake calipers in real time, measured in milliseconds.
Wow. So, putting on our management hats for a second, Why does an undergraduate business major or an operations manager need to memorize the operational differences between all these things? A two-in-one hybrid, a desktop, an embedded RTOS system.
Because misallocating capital on hardware is one of the fastest ways to destroy an IT budget. Let's look at a realistic scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine you are overseeing the technology procurement for a newly constructed state-of-the-art hospital. If you simply issue a blanket purchase order for 1,000 standard corporate laptops, you have failed catastrophically.
Right, because different roles have entirely different physical constraints.
Precisely. You need a nuanced, role-specific hardware strategy. You need highly mobile, lightweight, easily sanitized tablets for the nursing staff and doctors conducting rounds.
Enabling them to input vital patient data directly at the bedside.
Exactly. But if you give those same tablets to the hospital's billing and actuarial departments, you will absolutely destroy their productivity.
Because they require stationary, high-powered desktop computers capable of driving like 3 separate monitors to cross-reference massive databases and complex spreadsheets.
Right. And simultaneously, your biomedical engineering team is relying on highly specialized embedded systems running RTOS to ensure life support ventilators operate without a microsecond of latency.
It's incredible when you lay it out like that. Understanding the specific capabilities, limitations, and thermal realities of each form factor is how a manager optimizes workflows, protects capital, and ensures the right tool is deployed for the right job.
It is the ultimate exercise in operational efficiency.
But so far, our entire conversation has been hyper-focused on the personal edge of the network.
Right, the devices sitting on our desks, held in our hands, or installed in our cars.
But none of those devices exist in a vacuum. What happens when we scale up? What is the heavy-duty machinery actually powering the massive invisible networks that these personal devices are constantly talking to?
Well, when you leave the realm of the individual user and enterprise infrastructure, you transition into the world of servers, mainframes, and supercomputers.
Let's start with servers. At the foundational level of network architecture, you have the server. Conceptually, a server is exactly what its name implies.
It is a dedicated computer system within a network designed to provide or serve resources, data, or services to multiple client users simultaneously.
And they take on different roles depending on what the network needs. Like, if an entire floor of employees is trying to route print jobs to one massive industrial copier, they're routing that data through a dedicated network server.
Or if a customer types your company's URL into their browser, a specialized web server is receiving that request, processing it, and serving the HTML data back to render the website.
And if your sales team is pulling down shared corporate training videos, a file server is acting as the centralized repository storing and delivering that data.
Exactly. Servers are the backbone of day-to-day business networking. But what happens when the scale of data input becomes astronomical?
Like truly massive scale.
Yeah. What if you are a massive global financial institution like Visa or MasterCard, and you are actively processing millions of individual credit card authorizations every single hour from every corner of the globe?
A standard rack of file servers would instantly bottleneck, overheat, and crash, trying to manage that level of concurrent input and output.
That is exactly where you have to graduate to a mainframe.
So the word mainframe sometimes sounds like a relic from the 1970s, but they are very much alive and critical today, aren't they?
Oh, they are the absolute behemoths of the corporate IT world. They are utilized by massive retail conglomerates, major airlines managing global ticketing systems, and the world's largest banks.
Because their fundamental architectural priority isn't rendering beautiful graphics or being user-friendly in the traditional sense.
Right. Their priority is absolute reliability and handling vast, unimaginable volumes of transactional data with zero downtime and ironclad security.
They are the invisible engines of the global economy.
Truly. And then, positioned at the absolute apex of computational capability, we find supercomputers.
And it is important to distinguish them from mainframes, right?
Yes. A mainframe excels at processing millions of small, simple transactions simultaneously. A supercomputer is engineered to evaluate wildly complex theoretical data models at mind-boggling speeds.
We are talking about simulating the aerodynamics of a new jet engine at a molecular level, forecasting global climate change models over a century, or unraveling quantum mechanics.
The text specifically highlights the Aurora supercomputer as a prime example of this tier of hardware.
And because they require hundreds of millions of dollars to construct, house, and power, they are almost exclusively owned and operated by national governments or elite research universities.
Right. You're not putting one of those in a standard corporate office building.
So if we tie this back to business strategy, understanding these tiers really illustrates the critical hardware life cycle of a growing enterprise.
Definitely. Like if you launch a startup out of a garage, your initial hardware infrastructure might literally be 3 founders working off personal laptops utilizing cloud storage.
But as you scale, as you hire 50 employees who need to access secure internal proprietary data without latency, you must invest in a dedicated on-premise file server.
And if that startup explodes into a multinational retailer, processing millions of customer transactions concurrently during Black Friday.
You cannot rely on a cluster of standard servers. You must migrate your core database operations to a mainframe architecture.
Exactly. When a business rapidly scales its software and customer base, but neglects to scale the physical hardware infrastructure supporting it, it is virtually guaranteeing a catastrophic system failure.
And in business, system failure equals destroyed consumer trust and massive lost revenue.
Scaling the physical foundation is just as critical and often more complex than scaling the business model itself.
Okay, so we've looked at the different physical packages, from tiny embedded sensors to massive supercomputers. But regardless of the size, every single one of those machines relies on a central brain to actually function. Let's dig into the processor.
The central processing unit, the CPU, it is unequivocally the most vital component within any digital device.
To understand how it works, we have to look at its internal architecture. The CPU itself is essentially divided into 2 primary subcomponents, right?
Correct. First, you have the arithmetic logic unit, or the ALU.
The ALU. You can think of the ALU as the heavy lifter, the mathematical workhorse of the processor.
Yes, it is responsible for executing all the complex arithmetic calculations and logical comparisons required by the software.
And the second part is the control unit. If the ALU is the heavy lifter, the control unit is the incredibly efficient traffic cop directing the entire operation.
The control unit's job is to locate the specific software instructions, analyze what needs to be done, and then execute those instructions by dispatching commands to the ALU, to the memory modules, and to the input-output devices.
Telling them exactly how and when to act.
Exactly. And the way the CPU actually executes those instructions follows a rigid, highly synchronized routine known as the machine cycle.
Every single action a computer takes is broken down into this 4-step cycle. Let's walk through those 4 steps because this is basically the fundamental physics of computing.
Okay, step 1 is fetch. The control unit reaches out to the computer's random access memory, the RAM, and fetches the next necessary instruction or piece of data.
Okay, so it's grabbing the raw data. Step 2 is decode. Software code is written by humans in languages like Python or C++ care, but the physical hardware only understands binary electrical signals.
Right, the ones and zeros. So the processor must decode or translate that instruction into a machine-readable binary format.
Step 3 is execute. This is where the ALU steps in and actually performs the mathematical calculation or logical task.
And finally, step 4 is store. The process result is sent back and stored in the RAM, ready to be outputted to the screen or saved permanently.
Fetch, decode, execute, store. It runs this cycle constantly.
Constantly. And the sheer volume of cycles a modern CPU can perform is just staggering. The velocity at which a processor executes these machine cycles is referred to as its clock speed or clock rate.
We measure this speed in hertz, where 1 hertz represents a single complete cycle per second.
Which sounds incredibly slow until you look at modern specs.
Yeah. Today, we measure clock speed in gigahertz. The prefix giga meaning billion.
So when you buy a laptop with a 3 gigahertz processor, that physical chip is executing 3 billion complete machine cycles.
3 billion times a second. It is fetching, decoding, executing, and storing every single second.
It is a level of speed that is genuinely difficult for the human mind to even conceptualize.
It really is. Yet in the technology space, there is always a segment of users demanding more performance. The source material discusses a practice known as overclocking.
Right. This occurs when a user deliberately alters the processor's factory settings to force the internal clock to run at a higher frequency than the manufacturer officially recommends.
So if I buy a 3 gigahertz chip, I force it to run at 3.5 or 4 gigahertz. I get free speed.
Technically, yes.
If it's capable of going faster, Why don't manufacturers just set it that high out of the box? I mean, why isn't every corporate IT department overclocking their machines to get maximum productivity?
Because of the physical laws of thermodynamics.
Oh.
When you force a processor to execute cycles faster than its engineered tolerance, it requires more electrical voltage, and consequently, it generates a massive amount of excess heat.
Right.
If you overclock a system without installing extreme, highly specialized aftermarket cooling systems like liquid cooling loops, you will physically melt the silicon pathways on the CPU.
It will literally destroy itself.
Exactly. Furthermore, the moment you adjust those clock settings, you instantly and permanently void the manufacturer's warranty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So for a gaming enthusiast building a custom rig, that might be an acceptable risk. But for an enterprise IT director managing 5,000 corporate workstations, voiding warranties and risking catastrophic hardware failure just to gain a 10% speed boost is a completely unacceptable operational risk.
That makes total sense. Reliability trumps raw speed in a business environment. Let's shift to how the chips are actually built today. When you look at the specs for a new computer, you are constantly bombarded with terms like dual-core, quad-core, or octa-core.
Very common marketing terms.
What does a core actually refer to in this context?
A core is the physical embodiment of the processing components we just discussed. A single core contains one ALU and one control unit.
Okay.
For the first few decades of personal computing, CPUs were entirely single-core processors. They had one brain. That meant, despite operating at incredible speeds, they could technically only fetch, decode, execute, and store one single instruction at a time.
They simulated multitasking by switching between tasks incredibly quickly, but it was still a sequential process.
Yes. However, as business software became vastly more complex and demanded true multitasking, manufacturers adapted by engineering multiple independent processing cores onto a single physical silicon chip.
This is the multi-core processor.
Exactly.
And having multiple physical cores unlocks a game-changing technology called hyperthreading, doesn't it?
It does. Hyperthreading is a technology that allows a single multi-core processor to execute two or more completely independent sets of instructions at the exact same microsecond.
So instead of waiting for the processor pipeline to completely empty out before loading the next instruction, hyperthreading optimizes the pipeline so a new set of instructions can begin processing while the previous set is still finishing.
Yes, it exponentially increases the system's ability to handle heavy multitasking workloads without freezing.
The primary manufacturers driving this architecture are household names. Intel remains the dominant global force in corporate and personal processors.
And AMD has become a massive, highly competitive player, particularly noted for powering next-generation gaming consoles and high-end desktop environments.
And NVIDIA is a powerhouse, specifically highlighted in the text for their Tegra K1 mobile processor, which significantly pushed the boundaries of what was computationally possible in mobile, battery-constrained devices.
And of course, their GPUs are now the absolute foundation of the AI revolution. But the core processing principles remain exactly the same.
Let me throw a real-world business scenario at you regarding multi-core architecture. Say I'm an operations manager outfitting a regional field sales team with new laptops.
Okay.
I look at the prices, and a quad-core processor is significantly more expensive than a dual-core option. My first instinct is to think my sales reps aren't rendering Pixar movies or playing high-end video games. They just answer emails and look at spreadsheets.
So you think multi-core architecture is overkill?
Right. I should just save the budget and buy the cheaper, lower-core processors. Where is the flaw in that logic?
The flaw lies in misunderstanding how a modern corporate employee actually interacts with their software. It is a very common misconception that advanced processors are only for creative professionals or gamers. Think about the daily reality of that sales professional. They're almost never running just one lightweight application.
Yeah.
They are likely sitting on a live, high-definition Zoom video conference with a major client.
True.
Simultaneously, they are running a massive resource-heavy customer relationship management or CRM database in the background to log the call notes.
Right.
And while they are doing that, they are actively recalculating a massive multi-tab Excel spreadsheet to pull real-time pricing data to quote the client.
That is a massive amount of concurrent data.
It is. And if you provide that employee with a lower-end dual-core processor lacking robust hyperthreading capabilities, the physical hardware will bottleneck.
The video feed will freeze and stutter.
Exactly. The CRM will lag when saving data, and the Excel sheet will lock up while recalculating. That creates massive friction. It looks unprofessional to the client, and it frustrates the employee.
In a business context, lost microseconds of processing speed compound over the year into massive amounts of lost payroll dollars and reduced productivity. You are paying for multi-core processors to guarantee smooth multitasking.
The hardware has to support the workflow.
Now, having a processor capable of executing 3 billion cycles a second creates an entirely new problem. It is a massive bottleneck if that processor is starving for data.
Right. A fast brain is totally useless if it can't remember anything.
Which brings us to the holding tanks of the computer, memory and storage.
This is an area where terminology frequently confuses users. People often use the words memory and storage interchangeably, complaining that their phone is out of memory when they really mean it's out of storage.
Oh, constantly. But physically and architecturally, they're two completely different hardware components serving entirely distinct purposes.
Yes. The CPU must fetch data to process it, and it fetches it directly from memory, not storage.
Let's elevate our classic office analogy to really visualize the mechanical differences here. Imagine your computer system is a massive, highly optimized Amazon fulfillment center.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The storage, the hard drive, is the main cavernous warehouse. It holds millions of items representing years of permanent files, photos, and applications.
It has an enormous capacity.
Right, but because it is so vast, dispatching a forklift to go deep into the aisles, find a specific pallet, and bring it to the front takes a relatively long time.
That is an excellent visualization for long-term storage.
Now, RAM, random access memory, is the active staging and packing area right next to the loading docks. When the system knows it is going to need certain items to fulfill current orders, it pulls them out of the deep warehouse and places them in the staging area.
The staging area is physically much smaller than the warehouse, but the workers representing the CPU have instant, immediate access to whatever is sitting right there.
And functionally, RAM consists of solid-state electronic microchips slotted directly into the motherboard.
Right. Because it relies entirely on electronic gates with absolutely zero moving mechanical parts, it is incredibly fast. It serves as the computer's primary main memory, holding the specific data, application code, and operating system instructions that the CPU is actively executing in that exact moment.
However, RAM has one critical vulnerability, right?
Yes. It is volatile.
Going back to the warehouse analogy, volatility means that at the end of the shift, when the power is turned off, management requires the staging area to be completely swept clean.
Everything sitting in RAM is basically dumped in the trash.
When you power the computer back on the next morning, that staging area is entirely empty. If you didn't proactively save your active work back into the permanent, deep warehouse, the storage drive, before the power was cut, that data is permanently destroyed.
That is the defining characteristic of volatile memory. And because the CPU relies entirely on RAM to feed it the data it needs to process, the total capacity of your RAM directly dictates the overall speed and multitasking capability of the machine.
If your staging area is too small, it fills up instantly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The system then has to constantly pause processing to swap data back and forth with the much slower permanent storage warehouse, creating massive lag.
The text notes that a modern smartphone requires a minimum of 2 gigabytes of RAM just to function smoothly.
While a standard business laptop typically requires between 8 to 16 gigabytes, with 4 gigabytes representing the absolute bare minimum threshold for basic operability.
We also need to talk about cache memory. Where does that fit into our logistics flow?
Cache is a specialized, ultra-high-speed storage layer. If RAM is the staging area, cache is like a small clipboard that the forklift driver keeps directly in their hand.
Oh, that's good.
It holds the tiny specific bits of data and instructions that the CPU realizes it needs to access constantly and repetitively. By keeping it in cache, the CPU doesn't even have to look at the RAM.
The text breaks down cache into different levels based on proximity to the processor, right?
It does. Level 1, or L1 cache, is incredibly small, but integrated directly onto the physical CPU chip itself, providing instantaneous access.
In level 3, or L3 cache.
It's slightly larger and located adjacent to the CPU. There is also a disk cache utilized specifically by the hard drive to speed up retrieval from permanent storage.
The final piece of the memory puzzle is ROM, or read-only memory. This is a bit of an outlier because, unlike RAM, it is non-volatile.
Right, it doesn't wipe when the power is cut, but it is permanently installed by the manufacturer, and the data on it generally cannot be altered by the user.
It basically holds the absolute most basic, fundamental instructions the computer needs just to wake up, turn on the screen, and realize it is a computer.
Exactly. So with the volatile memory covered, we must shift to the permanent warehouse, storage. Storage devices are inherently non-volatile.
They are designed to retain data permanently, safely, even when the system is completely powered down.
From a hardware perspective, we categorize this into internal and external storage.
Internal storage refers to the primary drive permanently built into the system unit, housing the operating system and core applications.
Historically, and still prevalent in many enterprise environments, these were traditional magnetic hard disk drives, or HDDs.
The physics of a magnetic hard drive are actually fascinating. They utilize actual physical metal platters stacked on top of each other, spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute.
It's incredible. A mechanical actuator arm with a microscopic read-write head hovers mere nanometers above the spinning platter.
Using magnetic charges to alter the polarity of microscopic regions on the disk to represent binary ones and zeros.
Because they are such a mature technology, magnetic drives are incredibly inexpensive to manufacture and can hold vast amounts of data.
This makes them highly economical for large corporate server farms where raw capacity is prioritized over lightning speed.
But they have severe drawbacks for mobile computing. Because they rely on a physical spinning disk and a moving mechanical arm, they are inherently slower at retrieving data.
And more importantly, if you accidentally drop a laptop containing a spinning magnetic drive, that microscopic read-write head can crash into the platter, physically scoring the metal and permanently destroying your data.
Which is exactly why the consumer corporate hardware industry has aggressively shifted toward solid-state drives, or SSDs.
And how do SSDs solve the physical limitations of magnetic drives?
By eliminating the mechanics entirely. SSDs are built utilizing NAND flash memory. They consist of a grid of microscopic electrical cells that trap electrons to store data.
So there are absolutely zero moving parts, no spinning platters, no mechanical arms.
None. Because data is written and read electronically rather than mechanically, SSDs offer exponentially faster data transfer speeds.
The system boots up in seconds, applications launch instantly.
Furthermore, the lack of moving parts makes them highly energy efficient, saving battery life, and incredibly durable against physical shocks.
They have basically become the absolute standard for modern smartphones, tablets, and virtually all business laptops, even though they remain more expensive to manufacture per gigabyte than traditional magnetic drives.
Yes. And beyond the internal drives, we have external storage. These are supplementary devices outside the main system unit used for backup or data transfer.
This includes external hard drives, optical drives like DVDs, which use lasers to read microscopic pits on a disk, or the classic USB thumb drive,
which utilizes that same highly durable solid-state flash memory we just discussed.
And regardless of the physical medium, we measure the capacity of all this storage using a standardized hierarchy based on bytes. Let's scale that ladder, because the numbers get unimaginably large very quickly.
Let's do it.
As we established, a single byte represents roughly one character of information, like a single letter or number. From there, it scales exponentially by factors of roughly 1,000.
So a kilobyte is about 1,000 bytes. Think of a short text document.
A megabyte is 1,000,000 bytes, roughly the size of a high-quality photograph.
A gigabyte is 1,000,000,000 bytes.
A terabyte is 1,000,000,000,000 bytes.
A petabyte represents 1,000 terabytes.
And an exabyte is 1,000,000 terabytes.
It's massive. When you are purchasing a typical business laptop today, though, you are evaluating hard drive capacity measured in hundreds of gigabytes or low single-digit terabytes.
The sources also highlight necessary maintenance protocols for these storage drives, specifically for legacy systems.
Right. Over time, as files are created, deleted, and modified on a traditional magnetic hard drive, the data becomes physically scattered across different sectors of the spinning platter.
This fragmentation forces the mechanical arm to work much harder and move constantly to locate all the pieces of a single file, which drastically slows down the system.
To solve this on Windows 10 machines utilizing magnetic drives, you run the Disk Defragmenter application.
It essentially acts as a highly organized librarian, picking up all the scattered pieces of data and physically reorganizing them into contiguous blocks on the platter,
minimizing the movement required by the mechanical arm and speeding up file retrieval. On older Windows 7 systems, the text references the disk cleanup tool for clearing unnecessary temporary files.
Note that you generally do not need to, and actually shouldn't, run defragmentation software on a modern solid-state drive.
Right, as they manage data entirely differently, and unnecessary rewrites actually degrade the lifespan of flash memory cells.
Taking a step back to the management perspective, understanding this relationship between RAM and storage is arguably one of the most practical tools in an IT manager's arsenal for controlling costs.
Upgrading legacy corporate hardware is a constant battle.
Right. If you have an office full of 5-year-old desktop computers that are running sluggishly, the knee-jerk reaction is often to throw them out and authorize a capital expense for brand new $1,500 machines for every employee.
But if a manager understands how memory dictates speed, they realize there's a vastly more cost-effective solution. If the CPU is constantly bottlenecking because the RAM staging area is too small, simply opening the chassis and installing an additional stick of RAM, doubling the memory capacity from 8 GB to 16 GB, will drastically improve the machine's multitasking performance.
A $50 RAM upgrade can effectively extend the usable life cycle of a corporate asset by 2 or 3 years, saving the IT budget hundreds of thousands of dollars across an enterprise.
That is exactly the kind of operational insight a business professional needs.
Okay, we have the processor crunching the numbers and the memory storing the data, but a computer is useless if it's isolated. How do we get data from the outside physical world into our storage drives and RAM?
That brings us to connectivity. Ports, connectors, and protocols.
At a physical hardware level, we establish connections through ports and connectors. The terminology is simple but specific, right?
Yeah. A port is the physical receptacle or socket built into the digital device itself. And a connector is the specialized physical end of a cable designed to plug securely into that specific port.
The absolute king of modern connectivity is the Universal Serial Bus, or USB.
It is the standardized technology enabling communication, data transfer, and power delivery between peripheral devices and the main computer.
However, despite the word universal in its name, the physical history of USB is a frustrating mess of different, incompatible shapes.
It has been a complex evolution, that's for sure. The classic standard is USB Type A,
which is the large rectangular connector that every user has inevitably tried to plug in upside down on their first attempt.
because it is entirely asymmetrical and only fits in one orientation. Then you have USB Type B, the squarish connector traditionally used for bulky peripherals like printers.
As devices shrank, the industry introduced micro USB and mini USB to fit into the thin profiles of early smartphones and digital cameras.
But dealing with a drawer full of incompatible cables is a nightmare for users and businesses alike. The industry recognized this and has aggressively moved to standardize around USB-C.
USB-C represents a massive leap forward in hardware design for two critical reasons. First, from an engineering standpoint, it supports exponentially faster data transfer rates and possesses the electrical capacity to deliver enough wattage to power and charge full-size laptops.
Eliminating the need for separate proprietary power bricks.
Yes. Second, from a purely ergonomic standpoint, the physical connector is entirely symmetrical. There is no upside down.
It plugs in smoothly on the first attempt every single time, which significantly reduces physical wear and tear on the ports themselves.
For transmitting video and audio signals to monitors or projectors, the text highlights a few distinct standards. The dominant modern standard is HDMI, or High-Definition Multimedia Interface.
HDMI is a pure digital connection capable of transmitting both uncompressed high-definition video and multi-channel audio through a single streamlined cable.
Conversely, you have VGA, the Video Graphics Array. You likely recognize VGA as the bulky cables featuring the blue D-shaped connectors with the two small thumb screws on either side.
Oh yeah. VGA was the absolute standard for transmitting analog video signals to CRT monitors throughout the 1990s and early 2000s.
While it is rapidly becoming obsolete as the world shifts to digital standards like HDMI and DisplayPort, you'll still occasionally encounter VGA ports on legacy projectors in older corporate boardrooms.
On the audio front, we still rely heavily on the trusty 3.5mm audio jack. It is fascinating that this simple analog pin connector has survived from the era of 1950s transistor radios through the Sony Walkman era of the 1980s right up to modern laptops.
It remains widely used for standard headphones and speakers, although major mobile manufacturers like Apple and Google have controversially phased the physical port out of their flagship smartphones to save internal space and improve water resistance.
And if you are operating in a specialized environment like digital music production, the hardware relies on MIDI ports.
Musical Instrument Digital Interface.
Right. They are engineered to transmit extremely clean, latency-free digital music signals and control data between synthesizers and computers.
Speaking of proprietary hardware decisions, we must acknowledge Apple's distinct ecosystem, specifically their Lightning connector. Introduced prior to their recent shift to USB-C, the Lightning connector features a proprietary 8-pin adapter.
Like USB-C, it is fully symmetrical and designed for high-speed data synchronization and power transfer, but it remains exclusive to older generations of Apple mobile hardware.
That covers our physical peripherals, keyboards, monitors, phones. But what about the most important connection of all? Networking. Getting the machine onto the internet or the corporate intranet.
For hardwired connections, the industry standard is the Ethernet port, and it is crucial to understand that not all Ethernet cables connecting to those ports are created equal.
They are strictly rated in categories based on their maximum data transfer speeds and bandwidth capabilities.
The physical differences between these categories come down to how the internal copper wires are twisted and shielded to prevent signal degradation and crosstalk.
Right. CT5 cable, an older standard, can reliably transfer data at speeds up to 100 megabits per second.
CT5, the E, standing for enhanced, tightens the specifications to support gigabit speeds, or 1,000 megabits per second.
CT6 incorporates thicker gauge wire and superior shielding to handle massive throughput up to 10 gigabits per second.
And the bleeding edge standard mentioned, CT7, features extensive individual shielding for every wire pair.
Supporting 10 to 40 gigabits per second and in controlled laboratory environments, up to an astonishing 100 gigabits per second over a short distance of 15 meters.
It's incredibly fast.
Let me stop you right there and play devil's advocate from the perspective of a CFO auditing an IT budget. We live in an era where modern Wi-Fi is incredibly fast, highly reliable, and ubiquitous. Why on earth would any modern enterprise authorize the massive labor and material costs to physically run miles of CT6 or CT7 Ethernet cable through the walls and ceilings of a new office building?
Isn't a hardwired office a relic of the past?
Yeah, that's exactly what they'd ask.
It is absolutely not a relic when you understand the physics of enterprise networking. Wi-Fi is wonderfully convenient for mobile employees, yes. But wireless signals are fundamentally vulnerable.
Vulnerable to what, exactly?
They are subject to physical interference from concrete walls, steel beams, and even microwave ovens in the break room. Furthermore, Wi-Fi bandwidth is shared.
Oh, I see.
If you have 500 employees on a single floor all fighting for the same wireless frequency to stream video or download files, the network becomes congested and performance plummets.
It's like a traffic jam on a wireless highway.
Exactly. Physical Ethernet cables provide guaranteed dedicated bandwidth to every single workstation. Furthermore, they provide a vastly superior security posture.
Because a bad actor generally has to physically plug a device into a wall port to access the network, rather than attempting to intercept radio waves from the parking lot.
Precisely. If you are a financial firm managing a high-frequency algorithmic trading floor where executing a trade 1 millisecond slower than a competitor costs millions of dollars, or if you are managing a massive centralized data center,
you absolutely cannot tolerate the latency and instability of Wi-Fi. You rely entirely on the shielded reliability of wired CT7 infrastructure.
Security and guaranteed throughput. But for the vast majority of consumer hardware and mobile workflows, wireless protocols dictate our daily reality.
Wireless ports transmit data invisibly using short-range radio frequencies or light waves. The dominant force is Wi-Fi, which operates on the I-802.11 networking protocol.
It establishes a local area network hotspot by broadcasting data over 2.4 gigahertz and 5.0 gigahertz radio wave frequencies.
Next in the hierarchy is Bluetooth. While Wi-Fi is designed for networking multiple computers together, Bluetooth is a personal area network protocol designed for very short-distance data transmission between paired devices.
It utilizes short-wavelength radio waves that possess the capability to easily pass through solid objects like office furniture and walls.
However, the transmission power is intentionally kept very low to conserve battery life on small devices, which generally limits its effective operational range to roughly 35 feet.
It is the perfect protocol for connecting wireless headphones to a phone, pairing a smartwatch, or linking a mobile device to a vehicle's infotainment system.
And finally, we have a protocol that often gets overlooked but remains highly relevant in specialized fields: RDA.
Established by the Infrared Data Association.
Unlike Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, which use standard radio waves, RDA transmits data using longer infrared light waves. And here is the critical distinction. Because infrared light waves are longer, they absolutely cannot pass through solid objects.
RDA transmission requires a strict, uninterrupted, direct line of sight between the transmitting port and the receiving port.
You utilize this technology every single day when you point a traditional remote control directly at your television set. If someone walks in front of the remote, the signal is blocked.
And while that sounds like a severe limitation compared to Bluetooth in certain enterprise environments, that physical limitation is actually leveraged as a feature.
The text notes its use in specialized medical devices. If a doctor is calibrating a sensitive medical instrument in a crowded hospital wing, they don't want their device accidentally pairing with or receiving data from another machine 3 rooms away through the walls.
The strict line-of-sight requirement of EREA ensures absolute physical certainty that the data is only transferring to the specific device they are directly aiming at. It is a form of physical security.
So we have thoroughly explored how the CPU processes the data, how memory stores it, and the myriad ports and protocols used to transfer it in and out of the system.
But ultimately, all of that hidden electronic activity has to be translated into a format that a human being can actually perceive and interact with.
That transitions us into computer graphics and output. Once the central processing unit has finished calculating the raw data, it hands that data off to a highly specialized component called the GPU.
The graphics processing unit. The GPU is a dedicated processor, usually housed on a separate physical video card or graphics card plugged into the motherboard.
Its sole highly optimized purpose is to take that raw binary data and translate it into the complex visual images, colors, and geometries you see rendered on your screen.
By offloading this immense mathematical burden, the GPU frees up the main CPU to continue running the operating system and background applications without grinding to a halt.
And when we evaluate the physical screen displaying that output, we analyze several specific hardware parameters. The most basic metric is screen size, which is standardized across the industry by measuring the viewable area diagonally.
From one corner straight across to the opposite corner, usually expressed in inches.
But physical size does not equate to visual clarity. Clarity is determined by the density of pixels.
A pixel, which is a portmanteau of the words picture and element, is the absolute smallest, indivisible physical element of an electronic image.
It is a single microscopic dot of programmable color on your display panel. Every image, video, and line of text you see on a screen is just millions of these tiny dots changing colors in rapid synchronization.
The logic is simple. The more dots or pixels you can physically pack into a specific screen size, the sharper, more detailed, and more lifelike the resulting image quality will be.
The measurement of this pixel density is called resolution. Resolution defines the clarity and sharpness of a display, and it is quantified by counting the number of horizontal lines of pixels multiplied by the number of vertical lines of pixels.
The industry uses standardized thresholds for resolution. For a display to qualify mathematically as high definition, or HD, it must feature a specific native resolution of 1920 horizontal pixels by 1080 vertical pixels.
If you multiply 1920 by 1080, an HD screen is physically comprised of just over 2 million individual microscopic pixels firing simultaneously.
The source material also emphasizes the concept of native resolution. This refers to the actual fixed physical number of pixels permanently manufactured into the display panel.
For the absolute clearest, sharpest possible output, the incoming video signal from the GPU must exactly match the physical native resolution of the monitor. When there is a perfect one-to-one match, the display is considered pixel perfect.
If a computer sends a low-resolution signal to a high-resolution 4K monitor, the monitor has to guess and stretch the image across multiple pixels, resulting in a blurry, degraded output.
Taking this back to the IT procurement budget, how does an understanding of GPUs and pixels impact business strategy?
It dictates targeted capital allocation. A standard corporate accounting department staring at text-based spreadsheets all day does not require high-end, dedicated GPUs and pixel-perfect 4K monitors.
Outfitting them with premium graphics hardware is a waste of capital.
However, your marketing department rendering complex 3D product models, your architecture teams running CAD software, and your video editing departments absolutely require that enhanced graphical horsepower to perform their jobs without system crashes and massive rendering delays.
High-end computer graphics represent a distinct premium hardware budget category that an MIS manager must accurately forecast and allocate based on departmental workflow requirements.
It all comes back to deploying the right hardware for the specific operational task.
All right, we are down to our final and arguably most fundamental segment, under the hood. I want to conceptually tie everything we have discussed together. How does computer actually function at the most microscopic, elemental level?
How does a simple electrical pulse turn into a functioning, multitasking business workstation?
Exactly. To understand that, we have to strip away the user interface, strip away the operating system, and look at the absolute lowest foundational level of digital data, bits and bytes.
It is critical to grasp that all computer software, every application, every video, is ultimately built on a foundation of simple binary logic. Yes or no, true or false, on or off.
Because at the end of the day, a computer chip is just millions of microscopic electrical switches. Electricity is either flowing through the switch, meaning it's on, or it's not flowing, meaning it's off.
Exactly. This is binary code. A single on or off electrical signal is called a bit. It is mathematically represented as a 1 for on or 0 for off.
A bit is the absolute smallest possible unit of data in computing. It is the fundamental atom of the digital universe.
But a single bit, a single 1 or 0, doesn't provide enough information to be useful. Knowing a switch is on doesn't tell us much.
So the hardware architecture groups these bits together to form more complex patterns. The standard grouping is 8 bits combined together to make 1 byte.
And generally speaking, 1 byte of data represents a single recognizable character of human information, like the uppercase letter A, the number 7, or a punctuation mark.
Now, the performance of a processor is heavily dictated by how much of that binary data it can grab and process at one exact moment. That capacity is determined by the processor's word size.
Word size is the maximum amount of data, the maximum number of bits a processor can hold in its internal registers and process simultaneously during a single machine cycle.
Early generations of computers were severely limited by 8-bit or 16-bit word sizes. Today, modern enterprise processors are engineered with word sizes of 32 bits, and increasingly, 64 bits as the standard.
What is the practical difference between a 32-bit and a 64-bit processor?
Well, a 64-bit processor can grab, decode, and execute significantly larger chunks of complex data in a single machine cycle compared to a 32-bit processor.
Furthermore, a 64-bit architecture is required to address and utilize massive amounts of RAM. A 32-bit system physically cannot utilize more than 4 gigabytes of RAM, no matter how much you install on the motherboard.
Moving to a 64-bit word size removes that bottleneck, making the system vastly faster and more capable of handling enterprise workloads.
Okay, so the hardware processes the bits and bytes. But how does the computer know that a specific combination of 8 ones and zeros is supposed to represent the letter A and not the number 4?
The hardware and software have to agree on a translation dictionary. The text outlines 2 common encoding standards for this. The older legacy standard is ASCII, the American Standard Code for Information Interchange.
ASCII was designed to use just enough bits to represent exactly 256 unique characters. And for early computing, that was sufficient.
256 slots provide enough room for all the English uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers 0 through 9, and standard mathematical and punctuation symbols.
It was sufficient for localized, English-centric computing. But 256 characters is catastrophically insufficient for a modern, globalized world.
An encoding standard limited to 256 slots simply cannot accommodate the thousands of unique characters required to render Mandarin Chinese, Arabic, Cyrillic, Japanese kanji, or the hundreds of other languages used in global commerce.
That severe limitation forced the industry to adopt a much more expansive standard called Unicode.
And the math behind Unicode is what makes it so powerful. While ASCII essentially relies on 8 bits, Unicode uses at least 16 bits to define a single character.
Because of the exponential nature of binary, increasing the encoding to 16 bits doesn't just double the capacity. It expands the available slots from 256 to over 65,000 unique combinations.
That massive capacity allows Unicode to represent virtually every character in every language across the entire world simultaneously, while still leaving room for technical symbols and emojis.
I can hear an MIS student asking right now, why do I care about ASCII versus Unicode? Is that a computer science problem?
Let me paint a picture of why this is a massive business operations issue. Imagine you are the database manager for a rapidly expanding global e-commerce company headquartered in Texas. You just launched a massive marketing campaign in Asia.
Okay.
If your legacy customer database infrastructure was originally built strictly on the older ASCII standard, you have a ticking time bomb. The moment a new customer in Tokyo attempts to create an account and inputs their shipping address utilizing Japanese characters, your database will completely fail to recognize the binary input because it lacks the dictionary to translate it.
The system will either throw a critical error, crash the database application entirely, or corrupt the customer's data record by replacing the unrecognized characters with random question marks and broken symbols, rendering the shipping address completely unreadable.
A global business absolutely must ensure that every layer of their hardware and software infrastructure supports Unicode encoding to operate and scale internationally without catastrophic data corruption.
It is a mission-critical detail that can bring a global supply chain to its knees. So we have the processor architecture, the memory capacity, the binary bits, and the encoding dictionaries.
How does all of this data actually physically move around inside the machine between all these components?
The physical infrastructure moving the data is called the computer bus. A bus is the complex series of microscopic electronic pathways embedded directly into the motherboard that connect all the different internal components together.
The most critical pathway for overall system performance is the front side bus, or FSB. The FSB is the dedicated high-speed superhighway that connects the CPU directly to the main RAM.
Let's upgrade our analogies here. If the inside of the computer is a massive logistics network, the computer bus is the central highway system.
In this visualization, the word size of the processor, whether it's 32-bit or 64-bit, represents the physical size of the delivery trucks on the highway. Are they small vans carrying a little data, or massive semi-trucks carrying huge loads?
The bus width is the number of physical lanes on that highway. A massive 8-lane highway can permit vastly more traffic to flow simultaneously without congestion than a narrow 2-lane road.
The wider the bus width, the greater the volume of massive data transfer.
And finally, the clock speed of the processor represents the speed limit on the highway. If you have massive semi-trucks, 64-bit word size, driving on an 8-lane highway wide bus width, and the speed limit is 300 miles per hour multi-gigahertz clock speed, your computer is moving data incredibly fast.
The overall true speed of a processor is a combined synergy of clock speed, word size, and bus width.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize how hardware specifications interact to determine true operational throughput. And to bring this entire complex symphony of hardware to life, we simply have to press the power button.
This initiates a highly choreographed sequence known as the boot process. The boot process is simply the necessary sequence of events required to locate the operating system on the permanent storage drive and load it into the volatile RAM memory so the computer can actually begin functioning and accepting user commands.
The text outlines 4 very specific sequential steps for this boot process. Step 1. The user presses the physical power button, which sends an electrical signal to the motherboard.
The CPU instantly activates the BIOS. BIOS stands for Basic Input-Output System, and as we discussed earlier, it is permanently stored in that non-volatile ROM chip. It wakes the machine up.
Step 2. The BIOS immediately executes a critical diagnostic routine called the power-on self-test, or POST. This is the hardware rapidly checking its own physical integrity.
It pings the motherboard to ensure the RAM is properly seated, the keyboard and mouse are connected, and the hard drive is spinning and responding. If the POST detects a critical hardware failure, like missing RAM, it will halt the boot process and emit a series of warning beeps.
But assuming the hardware passes the POST diagnostic check, we move to step 3. The system searches the prominent internal storage drive, locates the core files of the operating system like Windows or macOS, and loads those critical instructions directly into the high-speed volatile RAM staging area.
And finally, step 4. With the core instructions loaded into RAM, the operating system assumes full control of the hardware. It checks the system registry, loads the user's saved configuration settings like connecting to the saved Wi-Fi network, and loading the desktop background, and displays the login screen.
At that exact moment, the hardware has successfully booted, the IPOS cycle is active, and the machine is fully awake and ready for human input.
And just like that, our computer is booted, the processors are crunching billions of cycles a second, the memory is staging the data, the network ports are transmitting it, and the graphics card is outputting it to the screen.
We've gone from dropping a piece of hardware on the concrete floor to understanding the microscopic gigahertz cycles and binary logic that make it the most powerful tool in modern business.
I want to genuinely thank you, the listener, for taking the time to join us on this massive deep dive into the physical hardware that powers our world.
It is undeniably complex machinery, but taking the time to understand its architecture and its limitations is exactly what separates a passive, frustrated user of technology from an active, strategic manager of enterprise systems.
I couldn't agree more. Now, if you had an aha moment today, if you finally understood how hyperthreading works or why USB-C is such a big deal, please hit that like button, subscribe to the feed, and share this deep dive with a classmate or a colleague who needs to hear it.
And be sure to leave a comment. It actually perfectly sets you up to answer our discussion question for this week.
Here is what we want you to analyze and think about. Look closely at the primary digital device you are using right now for your coursework or your career. Based on the specific technical concepts we just discussed, its physical form factor, the capacity of its RAM, the number of cores in its CPU, and its storage architecture. Why is it the correct piece of hardware for your specific daily operational task?
Or, conversely, looking critically at those exact specifications. What specific physical component is bottlenecking your productivity right now? And how would upgrading it improve your workflow?
Take a moment, evaluate your machine, and let us know your analysis in the comments. I genuinely cannot wait to read those breakdowns.
But remember, you can have the most expensive, hyper-threaded, liquid-cooled piece of hardware sitting on your desk. But right now, without complex instructions, it is nothing more than a very expensive, very heavy paperweight.
Next time in Module 20, we are diving deep into computer software and buying a computer, exploring the intricate virtual instructions and operating systems that actually bring all this incredible machinery to life.
You absolutely won't want to miss it.
So until next time, try not to drop your hardware and keep managing the future.